MotoGP completed its second race at the Jerez Circuit. We'll discuss who wins and where Marc Marquez finished. NASCAR had an eventful race at Kansas Speedway. We'll discuss about the playoff picture, who's looking in and who's out, and the latest on the grid ranking, all right here on Grid Live. Hello everyone, welcome to Grid Live. Joe Samaniego here, Kobe Lambeth from the podium finish. We got a lot to talk about, including NASCAR at Kansas, Jerez hosting MotoGP again, but we start with some of the latest news that came out of Formula One.
Yeah, so on Friday morning, Formula One announced the addition of 3 new tracks to the 2020 Formula One calendar. The new tracks are Nürburgring in Germany, Portimao in Portugal, and Imola in Italy. It was also announced that Formula One will not be racing at Interlagos in Brazil, Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, Canada. We're not racing in Mexico City either, or COTA in the United States for the first time since 2011. This expands the Formula One season to 13 races, 3 shy of 16 races, which Formula One ran for most of the 1990s and 2000s. So, Joe, what were your initial thoughts on the addition of Nürburgring, Portimao, and Imola to the calendar this year?
Definitely sort of a surprise and move. I know a lot of times we talk about, oh, it'd be great to see a major series add this circuit or come back to a circuit like Imola, especially after Imola was dropped. A lot of fans talked about, we love to see Imola come back on this schedule. This year, though, is so unprecedented that it's sort of a surprise, but at the same time, it shouldn't be a surprise. We knew F1 is going to look at replacement dates. There's been talk about an almost oval track. We're talking about so many different tracks, so to see these 3 get added, I think it's really exciting, especially Portugal. That seems to be something that got a lot of fans excited. Brand new track, some elevation change on the front stretch as well. And then, of course, Nürburgring, and then Imola. I think a lot of folks are really excited, especially if they've never seen a Formula One race at Imola before.
Yes, it's definitely exciting. It feels like, the 2020 Formula season is, when they added those 3 tracks, for me, it feels kind of like a throwback season in several types of ways. And luckily, those 3 tracks, Nürburgring, Portimao, and Imola, all 3 of those tracks are on project cars too. And at some point when I have some free time, I'm gonna go on project cars too and take the previous generation Formula One car they have available and try out those 3 tracks. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with the layout at Nürburgring, but I'm not really familiar with Imola or Portimao, so it'll be interesting, get on my PS4 and check out those tracks in the Formula One car, so I'll know what to expect when race day arrives. And the United States Grand Prix, as I mentioned, it's been a part of the Formula One schedule since the 2011 season, and we all know that COTA has been hit pretty hard financially due to the global pandemic, with all of the cancellations, losing Formula One and IndyCar this season. With the cancellation of the United States Grand Prix, how big of a loss is this for COTA?
Definitely, it's a really significant loss. This is a sellout event every year. They brought in some big concerts to get fans to come in for the entire race weekend. So to not have that, they lost the IndyCar Classic this year, a huge financial loss, and it's really unfortunate because COTA, of course, is one of the newest racetracks in the United States, and the way things are looking financially, especially for NASCAR before the pandemic, they weren't as successful, big compared to the 1990s. We know IndyCar is coming up, and then, of course, Formula One, you bring in so much. A lot of people ask the questions, are we going to see new racetracks, new road courses especially, being built? We're looking at NASCAR looking into coming back to short track like Nashville or Nashville Super Speedway. But the market for building a brand new racetrack for Formula One, IndyCar, and NASCAR doesn't seem like that's happening anytime soon. And so for COTA, one of the newest tracks, this is definitely a huge financial loss.
Yeah, you're right. Definitely a huge financial loss, and it's going to be interesting to see if COTA is going to be able to recover from this huge financial hit, because I know, it's a newer facility, beautiful track, hosted, Formula One, IndyCar, sports cars, all of that, and for them, not to have, any major events happening this year, that's going to be a huge blow, and hopefully COTA is able to have some racing action in 2021, although the future is unknown at this point. And Nürburgring and Imola have been on the Formula One schedule recently, but Portugal's last Formula One Grand Prix was in the 1990s, and this is going to be a new track for all of the current drivers. what do you think we can anticipate for the Portuguese Grand Prix, considering that nobody has raced at this venue in a Formula One car?
I'm going to go out on a limb. I think it's going to be one of the more crazier races that we've seen. There's always, of course, the simulators, the drivers, especially the bigger teams, they can afford more simulation times, trying out everything, figuring a way to learn the track. Still, it's going to be very different once they get to the track. So I think it's going to be a really exciting race, especially we got a great battle between Racing Point, McLaren. If Ferrari has a good day, they're up there. Renault could be up there. So even though we might see a Red Bull versus Mercedes battle, that mid-pack battle, I think it's going to be really entertaining.
Yeah, the Portuguese track is definitely an interesting layout. See, Formula E driver Antonio Felix da Costa posted a video of him testing. I believe it was the Red Bull. It was an older Red Bull Formula One car, and and the throwback sound of the normally aspirated engine. Such a beautiful sound that a lot of fans love. Yeah, and it was just showing a little bit of layout, just very interesting. And I agree with you. I think it's definitely going to be one of the more crazier Formula One races in recent memory, and I'm sure the fans are gonna love like a fresh. They're definitely gonna love to see some new tracks added to the schedule, because if you had told me prior to this year that we were gonna see new tracks added to the schedule, I would have laughed at you. Despite everything going on in the world, that's been super unfortunate, there's definitely been some good to come out of this.
And you bring up a really good point. We knew coming into the season this was going to be one of the most longest seasons, 20 to 21 races. Of course, some of the newer venues like Vietnam, the Dutch Grand Prix not taking place. So seeing some of these new events coming in this year, it's unprecedented, but it's definitely got the fans excited and talking about it. Speaking about crazy, Thursday night, NASCAR raced at Kansas Speedway at the Super Start Batteries 400. Now, Kevin Harvick drew the pole and was looking for his 5th career win for the 2020 season. Now, Kansas has been a really tough track to handle, and it proved on Thursday night, starting with Stage 1. Stage 1, we had a good long green flag runs, but finally Kyle Busch got the lead and went on to earn his first playoff point for the year. How crazy is it that we're this far in the season and Kyle Busch finally got his first playoff point of the year?
Oh yeah, definitely pretty crazy. And I'm just gonna say it's the year of 2020, right? Because Kyle Busch has struggled so far in the 2020 NASCAR Cup Series season. It's just been really crazy, because Kyle Busch he's the defending Cup champion, and it seems like Kyle Busch always dominates and does Kyle Busch things. And so far, we haven't seen Kyle Busch do Kyle Busch things so far this season. And there's still time for Kyle Busch and the number 18 team to get their acts together before the playoffs. And it's going to be interesting to see if they will be able to put everything together and improve their programs, because they've definitely been lacking speed this year in comparison to recent years.
Lacking speed, that consistency as well. Sometimes they have a really good race. Sometimes they seem to just really struggle. The second stage, we saw Brad Keselowski take that stage and earn some more playoff points. This point, at the end of Stage 2, we had 5 caution flags. We had talked about in Grid Life pre-race, only one race since 2015 had less than 5 caution flags. And then, of course, we enter Stage 3, 6 caution flags. 3 that involving wrecks that had 3 or more vehicles. The first one was the big one that occurred with Bubba Wallace. Then we saw Matt Kenseth get involved with Bubba Wallace. Both of them were pretty far behind the 16th place cutoff line for the playoffs. Following restart, we have Joey Logano. Tire goes down, collects Matthew DiBenedetto, Austin Dillon, and Jimmy Johnson. Now, Austin Dillon won last weekend's race at Texas, so they're already in the playoffs. How big of a break was it for the 3 team, knowing that they're in the playoffs and they didn't have to worry about such a disastrous night?
Oh, I guarantee you that the number 3 team can sleep a whole lot easier now if they're locking up their playoff spot by winning Texas Motor Speedway. And I think RCR in general, they've been looking pretty good lately, and they're unlocking more speed in their cars, and they're showing up to the track prepared and ready to go out there and compete. And And if they hadn't have picked up the win, that would have been, devastating to the team, and and like morale and all of that. But since they're locked into the playoffs, I feel like they can afford to have bad days at the track, and be able to leave the track being like, well, it was just a bad day, and we're gonna move on tomorrow because we're still in the playoffs. And we need to work towards getting our cars ready for the final 10 races of the season. So they won't, have to dwell on a bad day at the track for the next few weeks, unless it just becomes a string of bad luck, race after race after race, kind of like what's going on right now with Jimmy Johnson in the 48 team.
Yeah, Jimmy Johnson, they just seem to be having a lot of bad luck. 100% agree with you with Austin Dillon. Had they not gotten that win, they would have been really feeling a lot of pressure, but they're in the playoffs. They could have easily used the night to try to gain notes, especially since Kansas will be in the playoffs, and there's still going to be no practice, no qualifying for the rest of the season. Now, one person we mentioned about on-grid live pre-race edition was Matt DiBenedetto. Coming into Kansas, he was for sure safely in the playoff picture. He dropped down to 15th place because of that wreck. He is still 35 points ahead of the cutoff line, but of course, there's up to 60 points available in each race. How does Matt DiBenedetto and the Wood brothers respond in the next race, especially if they don't have a win yet this season?
But well, at this point, you just have to put that bad race behind you and just focus on going out there trying to collect as many points as you can and try to get a win. Winning a race would be the easiest way for your Matt DiBenedetto to rest and relax, and luckily, got some wild card races coming up in the next few weeks. Matt DiBenedetto is a pretty good road racer. We got the Daytona Road Course coming up, and that should be a strong race for him. And also you have the Daytona Oval right before the start of the playoffs, and that will serve as a wild card round for him to go out and grab a win for the Wood brothers.
Yeah, that'll be a surprise win. Of course, that's going to be a surprise race. I think so much unknowns going into that race, especially since we've never run there before. They have never tested it there. They can only go essentially off what they've done in the simulator. So those were two of the three big wrecks. The third one, and this was the really big one that got everybody's attention, was essentially the crash that involved Ryan Preece. Coming out of turn 2, Ryan Newman made contact with Christopher Bell. When these two started crashing, Ryan Preece, trying to avoid the crash, took a vicious hit. Can you tell us, Kobe, what happened to where caused Ryan Preece's crash? Because it was just one of the nastiest crashes I ever seen.
Yeah, Joe, it was a really scary crash for Ryan Preece. Yeah, as you can see right here, see Ryan Newman makes contact with the 95 of Christopher Bell, and they come down the track, and Ryan Preece, had nowhere to go, and the car was going at full speed and smacked the inside wall, went airborne, and almost flipped over onto its side, and then it came back down on all fours, the right side up. And it was just a very scary crash. The inside wall at Kansas has really, really took a beating this past weekend. First with Ryan Preece's hard wreck, and then Russ Lane in the Arca Menard Series race. I believe it was on Friday night. He smacked the inside wall, and then in the NASCAR Gander RV and Outdoors Truck Series race, Corey Ropers hit the inside wall hard as well. And traditionally, in like the past few years or so, it seems like that Kansas has been the home of some really hard crashes.
Very hard crashes. I mean, this was a week where we down saw, as you mentioned, the other crashes in that inside wall. It was just so amazing to see that every driver was okay. Of course, every driver took that mandatory trip to the infield medical center. And Wednesday on Grid Tonight, we will cover the evolution of the safety protocol drivers face after a major accident. Now, of course, after this accident, we still have a good amount of racing, and we had a very exciting three-way battle between Kevin Harvick, Denny Hamlin, and Brad Keselowski. Now, Harvick's car seemed to be really good on the short runs. That restart, he took off. Denny Hamlin, he came in, he got around Harvick as Harvick's car started to fade it. But as the run progressed, Brad Keselowski started catching up to Denny, but too little too late. Denny Hamlin, he got the win. Is Denny Hamlin back after the disappointment at Indianapolis?
Oh, I don't really think Denny Hamlin went anywhere in the first place. So I think Denny Hamlin's definitely going to be one of the championship contenders when we get to Phoenix at the end of the season. I think it's going to be between Denny Hamlin and Kevin Harvick. It seemed like those two are the two strongest drivers right now, and they seem to have everything together at this point. And I think that we're going to see those drivers every now and then. They're going to have a bad race, but yeah, as you mentioned, that was definitely a disappointing defeat by Denny Hamlin at the Brickyard 400. It looks like he was definitely going to win that race until the tire let go and he had that hard crash. Yeah, that was just a crazy day at the Brickyard. All of those tire failures and all of that. And that was just an unfortunate situation, that Denny Hamlin had no control over. And sometimes in racing, you don't have control of what happens. But Denny is definitely heading in the right direction. And at Kansas, it showed that despite any disappointment they may have between now and the playoffs, that the number 11 team is ready to fight for the championship after coming close last season and other seasons as well.
The number 11 is looking really good. One interesting thing that was pointed out during that broadcast was how for the grill opening on the Toyotas, they had a little white line around it to clearly mark where the grill was. Can't help but think that was in response to what happened to Denny last year. So it was really interesting to see that. Denny Hamlin, he's going to be really tough. He's definitely going to be a championship contender. Speaking about the championship contender, we're going to be talking a little bit about the playoff bubble. But first, let's look at the top 10 finishers for the race. Looking at the finishing results, of course, Denny Hamlin, who got the win, he was ahead of Brad Keselowski. Martin Truex Jr., he got around Kevin Harvick to take third place. Fifth place, Erik Jones. We're going to talk a little bit more about him ahead. Aric Almirola continues his streak of more top 10 finishes, one away from the top 5, but he has to be really happy, as well as Cole Custer, Alex Bowman, Kurt Busch, and William Byron scoring the top 10. Now, out of everybody on that list, one of the things we got to say is definitely taking a look at that list, how big of a confidence boost is that, especially for Cole Custer. We know he's in the playoffs, but he's still a rookie, and Erik Jones, who really has to claw his way back into the playoff picture.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's definitely a huge confidence boost for those young drivers. And Cole Custer, it's been a crazy transition for him, so far in his rookie season. It seems like he's finally getting the NASCAR Cup car figured out, because earlier in the season, it seemed like Custer, just coming to grips with the Cup car, and he was struggling a lot. And now Cole Custer, Cole Custer's up there competing with drivers who are champions and all of that, and guys who have tons of Cup experiences under a lot of Cup races on their resume and all of that, and definitely a confidence boost for Cole Custer. And while a lot of people might expect a rookie like Cole Custer maybe might go out after the round of 16, based on what Cole Custer is doing now, he actually might sneak into the round of 12 and shock some people. And Erik Jones, with the news of Levine family racing, might is unclear. And Christopher Bell, we don't know what's going to happen with his future yet if something happens to Levine family racing. And that leaves people wondering, is Erik Jones going to be with JGR next year? And Erik Jones, he's going to be under some pressure, especially if the worst comes to worst with Christopher Bell's situation, because Toyota's invested a lot of money in Christopher Bell, and they're not going to want to let him escape to another manufacturer or anything like that. So Erik Jones, having these good races, that's exactly what he needs in order to hopefully secure a spot in the playoffs and his future as well.
Yeah, definitely both on the line. This was, of course, a big confidence boost, especially for Cole Custer being a rookie. Now that we finished talking about them, let's take a look at the NASCAR playoff bubble. Of course, green indicates that they're pretty much safely in for now. Of course, it can only take a couple bad races. 60 points is the maximum points one can earn at a NASCAR Cup Series race if they sweep both stages and earn the win. Clint Bowyer, Matt Benedetto, and William Byron, all of them are within a race of falling out with a bad performance, in which case happened to Jimmy Johnson. Coming in, he was in the playoffs. Now he's 18 points behind. Jones, he's only 12 positions behind from the playoffs. And then, of course, Tyler Reddick is 10 behind William Byron. Now, when it comes to the playoffs and the drivers that are in the bubble, William Byron, of course, he finished 10th place. He has had a string of inconsistent runs. It's the performance he put in Thursday the kind of performance he needs to put for the rest of the season to get in the playoffs, or should he still aim high and go for that win?
Yeah, I mean, having those good performances are great and all, but I believe Matt DiBenedetto and down. I think all of those drivers need to go ahead and try to win a race because these good performances aren't going to mean anything for William Byron. The last driver in is really not going to mean a single thing when somebody below that cut line pulls off a surprise win, and then he's going to be out, and then he will definitely be in a must-win situation. So I feel like that although you can definitely build up points and get in and get in the playoffs that way at this point, but winning a race would definitely make your life a whole lot easier, and you'll be able to sleep better at night as you're preparing for the playoffs.
Sleep a lot better, and of course, as you mentioned, somebody out of the picture, 20th place, Bubba Wallace. He is 100 points away from the cutoff, so essentially he'll need to win to get in, unless everybody ahead of him has just the worst luck. But if somebody like Bubba Wallace or somebody like Matt Kenseth, who's further behind, gets a win, all of a sudden now William Byron, he's on the bubble and needs to get a win. So definitely I would agree with you. He needs to get a win. That is the best way to secure a spot in the playoffs. Now, of course, the next NASCAR race, they'll be going to Loudon, New Hampshire, the Magic Mile up there. Be sure to tune in Saturday as we will preview the NASCAR race and a Formula One race, and of course, 6 Formula E races within 9 days following. So we encourage everyone to be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that way you don't miss any of the action, and we still have more action to talk about right here on this episode.
Yeah. Switching gears now to MotoGP. It was an incredibly hot day for MotoGP with temperatures near 100 degrees Fahrenheit for all the riders. And the start of the race had 21 starters, but attrition definitely took its toll. The race started out with Fabio Quartararo on the pole, but Maverick Vinales took the lead until it went wide and lost the lead in second place to Quartararo and Valentino Rossi. Then the first lap saw Miguel go out in the first corner. He did get up and got back to the medical center. However, he was just the first of many riders that went off the track as tire grip was struggling with the on nearly 100-degree heat, and Vinales continued to struggle and fell out of the podium position as Francesco took second around both factory Yamaha riders, and Jack Miller took a hard high side crash, reducing the field down to 13. Then Franco Morbidelli went out with a mechanical issue with his Yamaha, making many wondering if everyone else with the Yamaha should be concerned. And Francesco, who was running second, had mechanical issues and pulled off the track and had to retire from the race. And this left 3 Yamahas in the top 3 with 13 riders left running, and with 2 laps to go, Valentino Rossi went wide, and Vinales finally took over second place, but still too far behind Fabio Quartararo as he took the win, making it 2-0 so far with 11 races remaining in the 2020 MotoGP season. Maverick Vinales and Valentino Rossi made it a Yamaha podium. Joe, what were your thoughts on this on the MotoGP race earlier today?
It was a very chaotic race. For fans, of course, that are not too familiar with MotoGP, these motorcycle races, they're pretty short, about an hour or so. This race today was 25 laps. May seem like nothing, especially for Cup cars, Indy cars, Formula One. But in motorcycle racing, this was some of the most tricky conditions the drivers have seen in a long time, battling the heat, the tire grip. Of course, if you've seen these drivers cornering, they are just about down on the pavement. So they're really pushing the limit. So this was a very entertaining race. We saw some great battles. At the end, Fabio did lead just about every lap, had an 8-second lead. But behind him, we saw everything going on. Some really hard racing. It definitely took a toll on the drivers, and definitely a well-earned break before they go to the next race at the Czech.
Yeah, and Cal Crutchlow and Alex Rins both were not 100% today, but they were able to finish the race. What do you think of their efforts, and do you think Marc Marquez made the right decision to not race today?
I would definitely say Marc Marquez made the right decision to not race today. He pushed it during practice. Qualifying, he realized he can't do this. He said his elbow was starting to feel weak. He did the right choice. Cal, he actually went out of the race at one point, pulled it into the garage, but then as we saw more riders were falling out of the race, he went back out there to try to earn some points. Then Alex Rins, he started way in the back, essentially second from last, and he was not 100%, but he just kept climbing up as other riders were falling. So big shout out for Alex for finishing the race, Cal for pushing it, and definitely I gotta say, my opinion, Marc Marquez did the right choice in deciding not to race.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, and kudos to Marc Marquez for making the best decision for his health. I understand why he wanted to race initially. These riders they want to be able to go no matter what. And back in the day you'd have drivers, riders, all of them. They would get injured and then they'd be back the very next week to race, although they were not 100% at all because they felt like they were obligated to compete in every race and give their best. And unfortunately, Marquez just wasn't ready to go, and I have a ton of respect for him deciding to put his health and safety first over racing. I'm sure at some point in the distant future, Marquez is going to be ready to go again, and he'll definitely show his competitive form. And now, talking about the weather, we saw the hot temperatures near 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And for new fans, how challenging is MotoGP on a really hot day today because only 13 riders finished?
Very challenging. One of the things I think a lot of people, especially if you're a race fan that follows NASCAR, you are aware when the temperature on the air is around 100 degrees, the racetrack temperature, it's a little bit hotter. Stock cars, of course, we know the drivers, and this year, IndyCar with that aero screen, we know when that enclosed cockpit, it gets hotter in there. You need some air circulating. So a lot of people will assume MotoGP, the motorcycle racers, they can stay cool. Not the case. With a full face helmet and their protective gear and uniforms, they're up to 140 degrees out there on that motorcycle. They're really using every muscle controlling that motorcycle around. And we saw the number it took. Just the slightest lapse of concentration off the track. We saw a lot of drivers go off the track. The heat was something else. And after that race, especially for the folks that didn't see it, you can probably find it on NBC and the sports app. Look at those top three finishers after the race. They were just worn out. Being in 140 degrees, riding a motorcycle that hard, that is something else. And these guys really put on a great show.
Yeah, and despite those, challenging hot conditions, Fabio Quartararo is now off to a perfect start in the 2020 MotoGP season, and he has now taken the lead of the grid ranking.
Yes, he took the grid ranking lead. Of course, last year, the grid ranking only had one lead change. That was when Marc Marquez overtook Scott McLaughlin, essentially winning the championship. This year, we already had four lead changes amongst three drivers. So, taking a look at the grid ranking, you see Fabio taking the lead. Of course, he's off to a 2-0 start, so it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the third race following. Scott McLaughlin, Lewis Hamilton, and Scott Dixon, neither of them raced this past weekend, but they're going to have races for Formula One next week. Valtteri Bottas as well, and then Kevin Harvick, he falls to sixth place for today. Thursday's race. Sebastian Ogier, Denny Hamlin, he moved up some with his win. Antonio Felix da Costa, that's going to be really interesting to follow him, Mitch Evans, and all the Formula E races as they're going to have 6 races in 9 days. That's just going to be insane. And then Maverick Vinales climbs up to the top 10. Now, one of the interesting things, this is the first time ever in the grid ranking that Marc Marquez is not scored. Of course, this is the fourth season of the grid ranking. Marc Marquez is a 2-time champion. Martin Truex Jr. won the grid ranking world championship in 2017. And every year, Marc Marquez has always been there. So this is the first time ever Marc Marquez is not being scored. Of course, the next MotoGP race, Marc Marquez does plan to race. That is the Czech Grand Prix on August 9th.
Yeah, and on Wednesday, be sure to join us for Grid Tonight as we cover the latest motorsports news from around the globe and focus on the evolution of safety protocols drivers face after a major accident, a topic of discussion that came up after Marc Marquez attempted to compete in the MotoGP race only a few days after having surgery. And then on Friday, our new program will debut called Life on the Grid, a new monthly series focusing on the hardworking individuals in the motorsports community. Our first guest is going to be Mr. Brett Whittingham, a motorsports journalist from Speedway Digest, and our musical guest is Sarah Brown, aka Short Blonde Singer. And on Saturday, we're going to have the Grid Live pre-race show as we preview the Formula One and NASCAR Cup Series races and a whopping 6 Formula E races next week. Also, we want to share a special thank you to everyone on Twitter for following us. We had a milestone of 500 followers this weekend, and we really appreciate the support and encourage you to visit our website to see our entire network, including the Grid World Motorsport League, which you can also follow on Twitter. For Joe Samniego, I'm Kobe Lambert. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful night.